Good morning, everybody, and I really would like to welcome you all here this morning. And this is the third and indeed the final event in this year's series of Rural Ideas Fora. Being hosted by my department. And I must say, as Minister, so far we really have heard some valuable insights from a wide range of stakeholders as we discuss the challenges and indeed the opportunities facing our rural communities. And I have to say, I'm very pleased and I'm delighted actually with the level of engagement that we have had over the past number of weeks. And indeed, many of you participating in this morning's session will have already attended at least one of the previous fora and can testify to the quality of the discussions that indeed have taken place. As I mentioned previously, these events represent an extremely important commitment under our rural future, and it's a responsibility that my department and I take very seriously. And we want to ensure that we continue this direct engagement with rural stakeholders that began when we were developing our 5-year policy. Because producing a policy like our rural future, it's pointless unless it's followed up with that opportunity for our citizens to have their say as to how we make rural Ireland a better place to live, work and raise a family, because you come with a wealth of experience. So we want to hear from you and we really do appreciate your engagement. The theme for our forum today is Revitalising Towns and Villages. And as you can imagine, that's something that's very close to my heart. Our previous discussions have focused on the potential opportunities that can be maximised from remote working and the transition to a carbon neutral economy. And while these themes undoubtedly have benefits for individuals, we're also talking about real changes in behaviour that have the capacity to have a massive impact on the character and indeed populations of rural towns and villages themselves. Our rural future places a huge emphasis on the potential for remote working to enable more people to live and work in rural areas, no matter where their employer is headquartered. By giving people that choice to work from their own local communities, we can revitalise our towns and our village centres and reverse the population decline by not just retaining people, but actually attracting them back. And we have seen during the strictest lockdown periods during the pandemic how working from home can provide a boost for rural economies and communities. And people who would normally commute for a couple of hours every day were reintroduced back into their local town, to their local village or to their local farmers market. And they did discover the benefits of engaging directly with their local retail outlets or just enjoying the personal touch of buying direct from the local supplier. And since since over the summer and indeed as recently as last week, I've been visiting many towns and villages up and down the length and breadth of the country, and it would do your heart good to see what's happening on the ground locally and how there's a huge emphasis on local producers, local suppliers. I was at the launch of the social enterprise strategy for County Cavan on Monday, and I discovered it's a social enterprise called Green Box, and it's all about the local suppliers providing into the farmers market and the difference that's making in that community. So there's loads of really good examples happening there. I want to see them happening across in other parts of the country, and I want to. It really is inspiring. And to get the opportunity for people to see what others are doing and use this forum as an opportunity to exchange ideas and how we can all work together for a better outcome. And I can just say that you can see where neighbours who had infrequently met in the past, they found themselves shopping to chat with their neighbours over a cup of coffee. So what we're going to bring to rural Ireland is an experience. When you go into our towns and villages, you're going to experience something different. And I think that will change the face of retail. We know we face the challenges of online retail, but if we can give people that sense of community, that sense of belonging, and that experience when you go into your towns and villages, I think that's going to make it such a more, it's so going to be so much more attractive. But can I say that remote working allowed people to rediscover then the real benefits of growing up in the communities they call home? And I know that the football clubs are delighted to have more young people joining up. And I was at the county final in Monaghan on Sunday, and it was great to hear from the GAA that since the pandemic, the number of young people that are joining their local clubs and getting involved in sport has increased. So again, that tells me that there's more young families going back into communities, and we want to support them, and we want them to stay. And can I just say the travel restrictions associated with the lockdown also brought some unexpected benefits in terms of climate and community impact. Daily commuters, as you know, reduced their personal car and their public transport usage. They increased their active travel and exercise in local areas. And for many of us living in rural Ireland, we had the opportunity to rediscover some of the natural beauty surrounding us in the blueways, the greenways, and the walking trails in our local areas. And engaging in these types of activities also helped to support many local and small, medium businesses, social enterprises, and entrepreneurs at a time when they needed it most. I was down in Clonmel last week, and I went on the Blue Way that goes along to Carrick-on-Suir, and there's plans there to link it up with Waterford. And the hotelier there was telling me the amount of people that come and stay in his hotel, their bikes on the back of the on the back of the car or the van, and away off they go on the bicycles. And it really is, it's actually an attraction for Clonmel, the Blue Way there, and there's loads of people using it, and people are coming there as a tourist destination. So again, there's so much that we can do to improve economic activity, but also by attracting more tourists into areas. Now, since the travel restrictions have eased, I've been able to visit the towns, as I said, and many of the people I've spoken with have told me how being able to stay living and working in rural Ireland has changed their lives and their families' lives for the better. As we emerge from the pandemic, we have the opportunity to create the new normal. We want to see vibrant, thriving and sustainable towns and villages across the country. We'll shortly be announcing the government's Town Centre First policy, that's as committed to in our rural future, and this will help put the structures in place at a national and local level to enable towns to respond to the challenges and the opportunities they face based on a plan-led approach, with government policies supporting new initiatives as well as the unprecedented level of ambition and investment outlined in Budget 2022 and the NDP. We can adopt new lifestyle changes that make living and working in rural Ireland a reality, not just an aspiration. So I want to see more people. Working from home is great, but working from home is not easy, especially if you have other calls on your time, and sometimes it's hard to get a quiet space. But the co-working spaces are, I think, in the towns and villages are the game changers that we want to continue to support and to encourage people to take up that opportunity. And there's many other opportunities in town centres where we can convert old buildings into 21st century use. I was in Ballybofey, where they have where they've got funding to convert an old cinema, and it is going to be a game changer for them because there's going to be enterprise space, so it's going to bring more a vitality into the centre of town. So we want to see more of that around the country. So as Minister for Rural and Community Development, I'm committed to ensuring that our rural future, of course, is a living document, and it continues to reflect your views and the views of people across Ireland. And I'm delighted that this series of Rural Ideas Fora is a significant part of that process. And I really do look forward to today's discussions and indeed your feedback, because you're out there, you're seeing what's happening. And indeed, 2 years ago, who would have ever thought that remote working would become so important to all of our lives? So things change, and as things change, we want to make sure that our rural future remains relevant, and it remains a document that supports a changing world that we live in. So I really do thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning, and I look forward to hearing your views. So thank you again, Ali, and I'll leave it at that. Thanks now.
Thank you so much, Minister, for that passionate opening to our discussion this morning. I really just perfect, and those personal stories as well, and it was just bringing to life to me what's happening all around the country. So thank you. So what we're going to do now is, I mean, maybe I should just say is something about the format of our forum this morning. We're going to first of all hear about some of the ongoing work that's actually being done on the part of the department and really hear what's been happening there. And then we're going to move into a panel discussion with a number of different leaders who have real experience, direct on the ground experience of working with our very theme today. Then we'll have a chance for some small group conversations, and then we'll come back and have a plenary discussion together. So the time will fly past. I can already feel there's a lot of energy for this conversation today, and really looking forward to it. So without further ado, it is my real delight as well to introduce JP Mulheron, who is the Principal Officer in the department, overseeing a number of the rural development supports, including the Town and Village Renewal Scheme, the Tidy Towns competition, has a leading role in the outdoor recreation policy, and has been introducing the Town Centre First framework. So JP, I will just find you here to bring you up onto the big screen. Let me just do that now. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali, and good morning to everyone. Good morning, Minister. I hope you can all hear me there okay. I can't actually see anybody now the way I have the PowerPoint set up, but hopefully I'm coming through to you all loud and clear. As Ali said, I'm based in the Rural Programmes and Policies Unit. We're actually based in Ballina in County Mayo, and the Minister mentioned the difficulty of finding quiet spaces. I'm actually coming to you from my daughter's bedroom in Ballina at the minute, so please excuse the background, and hopefully there's no interruptions during what I promise will be a fairly brief presentation. So my role here today is really just to give you an update on where we are in terms of the introduction of the Town Centre First policy, and also, if there's time, to say a little bit about some of the funding and investment supports that we're providing at the moment. Just to say, I can't share the full slide presentation because it didn't work when we were trying it earlier, so hopefully you can see these slides okay as I move through the presentation. So look, I don't propose to go through the detail of our rural future. Most of you will be familiar with what's in it. You'll know that revitalising rural towns and villages is central plank of the policy, and there's some fairly far-reaching policy measures included within all of that. Today is not so much about going through that, it's more about hearing from all of you, discussing how we can build on what's in the policy, how we can respond to new opportunities, and as the Minister said, we want our rural future to be a living document and to be responsive as we move on. So yeah, very much looking forward to everybody's contributions here today. I would actually draw your attention though to two specific points within our rural future, which I find particularly interesting and which guide a lot of the work that we're doing within the department. And the first of those is this idea of the interdependency between rural areas and urban areas. And when we say that, it's not just about towns and their hinterlands, it's really about villages and towns and cities and how they're all interconnected in terms of their functions and how they interact with each other. And I think we really need to understand this interconnected nature of our towns and villages and cities if we want to assist them in developing, involving, and ensuring their own functions fit within that overall network, because no town exists in isolation. And the second point I draw attention to quite regularly is this idea of that no two towns are the same. Towns are similar. There's a lot that we can learn from each other, but no two towns are the same. Each has its own unique starting point, based on everything from its people, its location, its population, where it is relative to other urban areas, its heritage, its history, its culture. So all of those things are unique to each individual town. So when we're trying to respond to the needs of those towns, this idea of a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't really work. And our rural future is very strong on this idea of a place-based approach and a plan-led approach, where local authorities and local communities and local stakeholders can identify their own way forward based on their own unique position. So in terms of the detail of what's in our rural future, I just point you towards the specific part of the policy. There is an implementation programme that's been developed by Andrew and his colleagues and the Minister. And the Minister will be publishing an update on that at the start of next year to show how we're proceeding. So I would point you all towards that. So, you know, getting down to where we're at with Town Centre First, as you know, it's a commitment in our rural future, as the Minister mentioned in her introductions. And it's really about putting towns at the heart of decision making and putting an enabling framework in place to support local communities, local businesses and local authorities to chart their own way forward for their towns. So in terms of the process of how it's developed, we have an interdepartmental group that's jointly chaired by myself and colleagues from the Department of Housing. There's an advisory group that's feeding into the development of the policy, and Finbar, who's on our panel, is part of that advisory group. And obviously there's been a clear link all along with Housing for All and the new NDP as we've been developing the Town Centre First policy. It's very much informed by the Town Centre Living Initiative that was developed by this department, on which a report was published last year, and there's a number of actions in there that the interdepartmental group have considered. And in terms of the direction, it's going back to that point I made already about not having a one-size-fits-all approach, and the need to put the structures in place to allow local authorities and local communities to tailor the response to their own individual town. And there will be an emphasis as well on, you know, the economic function of towns, the social function of towns, embracing new opportunities such as those referenced by the Minister around remote working and digitalization and other opportunities like climate action and so on. And it's taken a little bit longer to develop the policy than we would have liked, but we are aiming to have it completed before the end of the year, so you will be seeing it very shortly. In terms of what's in it, obviously I'm slightly restricted in what I can say because it has to be signed off by government and shared with the advisory group before it's published, but some of the building blocks you'll already be aware of. You know, this idea of collaboration between local authorities and town stakeholders in implementing it. The need to improve our understanding of our towns, both at an individual town level through things like the health checks that have been developed by the Heritage Council and others, but also at a national level so that we can compare and contrast and understand the needs of our towns. The idea for a plan-led approach is very much in the public domain as well as part of our rural future, and indeed we're already commencing that process even in advance of Town Centre First being published, with funding for the development of master plans in towns this year, and the Minister will be announcing the towns involved in that before the end of the year. Also, what's well signalled as well, I think, is the idea of building the capacity of at a national level in terms of the supports that we provide at a national level and at a local level, both for town teams and for local authorities to implement Town Centre First and chart their own way forward. And the first step in that was the announcement in Budget 2022 by Minister Humphreys of funding for town regeneration officers who will have a central role in all of that. And another understandable piece of the jigsaw is the money. Without the money, none of this is going to happen, of course, and there's a whole range of investment supports, some existing, some that have been expanded, some new ones. The Rural Regeneration and Development Fund, the Urban Fund that you're all familiar with, new funds like the Creeconia ones that's announced in Housing for All, which will look at service sites and refurbishment supports for individual properties, and new ERDF funding, which will look at addressing vacancy alongside the Town Centre First approach. So just moving on, because time is moving on me. I have a stopwatch here so that I don't go on for too long. Looking at the investment supports that are available, a very significant one from the perspective of this department and from the government generally is the Rural Regeneration and Development Fund, and that's providing supports to towns and villages with a population of less than 10,000 people. And for towns and cities larger than that, we have the Urban Fund, which is delivered by our colleagues in the Department of Housing. And 64% or 2/3 of projects delivered through that fund have a town centre regeneration component. And so far, funding of about $250 million has been allocated to those projects. But that's really just the start of things, really. And there's a really significant amount of funding available through that fund over the next number of years. The next call for applications under that fund is expected to be announced very shortly, and it will have a very strong emphasis on town and village regeneration and linked to the Town Centre First policy. So that figure of 64% that's up there in the second bullet point, I'd expect that to increase substantially in the coming years. What does the funding focus on? It won't be a surprise to any of you. You're all involved in this already with the local authorities. You know, focus on planned and sustainable regeneration, putting the necessary facilities and infrastructure in place around remote working and connectivity and town centre residency, and a growing recognition of the need to address vacancy and dereliction in town centres. I have some examples here. I won't dwell on any of them. There's phases of the Castleblenny Market Square regeneration that have been funded through the fund. The projects in Boyle, I think, are particularly interesting because they're informed by the Boyle 2040 vision or master plan that has been developed for Boyle. And that's interesting because I think it informs what we're going to do under Town Centre first. It means that the investment is going into initiatives that have a good base and that are supported by an evidence base and engagement between local authorities and local communities. And because they have that Boyle 2040 plan, they're in a better position to come to funds like the RRDF and to source funding. So I think it's an interesting model to look at. The other significant scheme that we have, our investment program they have within the department, is a Town and Village Renewal scheme to support the revitalisation of towns and villages. Excuse me. That is of a smaller scale and deals with smaller scale projects. So, you know, we're talking projects to date that have an average funding amount of about 100,000 euros, and 83 million euros has been invested in that scheme so far. But the government's approach to it is, our contribution to it is increasing, as you can see by the increase in the funding. It's nearly doubled in the space of a couple of years, from 15 million last year to 22 million next year. And the focus of it is also changing in response to our rural future. So there's a real emphasis this year on vacancy and dereliction in town centre living, and this idea of bringing vacant properties back into use as remote working hubs. And I suppose an indication of the ambition that we have for the program is the increase in the grant levels that are there, from 200,000 euros maximum to 500,000 euros, to really be able to bridge the gap up to the Rural Regeneration Fund, and also to address those projects of scale in terms of vacancy and dereliction. The next slide really just shows, you know, an indication of where the funding under Town and Village has been going so far. You can see a strong focus on streetscape and town environment enhancement, which will continue. But you'll see the likes of the remote working and addressing vacancy and all of that increasing. The map on the right, which is slightly difficult to make out there, but it shows the spread, I think, of the distribution of funding, which is part of the strength of Town and Village. The smaller scale investment can probably spread and have a reach that maybe the larger funds can't have. Just finishing up now, some examples of what's been done. The square in Eden Derry, investment in public realm development there, and alongside that, investment in the town hall in developing the eHive co-working hub, which is real state-of-the-art facility acting as a remote working location and as an incubation hub. Other examples, the accelerated measure that we introduced last year in response to COVID-19, which, you know, because of the size of the scheme, allowed it to adapt quite quickly to the challenges that towns were facing, and to provide small amounts of funding into things like repurposing public areas, providing awnings, providing seating, providing online platforms for towns. And the example there that you see on the right hand side is from the Market Square in Kildare Town. Second last slide is the funding that we're providing this year to streetscapes enhancements, which is an action in our rural future to upgrade and enhance shop fronts and street facades. There was 7 million euros invested in 120 towns and villages this year, with thanks to the local authorities and the property owners for delivering it in really what was a short time frame, but there's been a great response to it, and we think it's going to have a big impact, and something that we'll be looking at again in the future. And the examples there are from funding that was provided previously to New Ross for murals, which, you know, really does have an impact in terms of the attractiveness and vibrancy of a place. And now the last slide on this whistle stop tour, just to let you know that there's story maps up on the department's website for both the RRDF and from this morning actually for the Town and Village Renewal Scheme, which, you know, for those of you who are interested, will explain a little bit more about the investment programs, where the money is going and what it's doing. And there was also a policy review of the Town and Village Renewal Scheme published last week, which goes into even more detail for those that are interested. So with that, Ali, it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully a little bit of a background to people about some of the work that's happening within the department. Only a snapshot of it, but hopefully useful for the discussions later on in the morning. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, JP. Yeah, I had a real impression of how much has been happening. I know you talked about, you know, different speeds of the journey and so on, but I just got a sense of how much. And hearing you talk about this real focus on the dereliction of inner towns really kind of resonated with a deep need we have. And also the streetscapes. I'm up here in Dundalk, where we have an incredible a number of murals being created on the sides of buildings, and it makes such a difference. So yeah, thank you. There's a lot of updates for us, food for thought, and we will take that as we go into our further conversations. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Anne.
So yeah, so we will now move into hearing some more views, thoughts, experiences from our leaders that are part of our panel today. So I would like to introduce each of those colleagues who will be part of this conversation, and then we will get into hearing their reflections on our theme. So first of all, I am really delighted to introduce Michael Begley. So Michael, I'll just bring you up here onto the screen. So Michael is the manager of the Tipperary Town Revitalisation Project, and I know you previously worked in the Leo there, and as a rural development programme officer with South Tipperary Development Company, and so I have a huge amount of experience in this area, and I know you've been working, as you say, there's a lot being done and there's a lot to do, and we'll hear a lot more about that. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Ellie.
Great. And then next, I would very much like to welcome Finbar Phelan. So Finbar, let me just see if I can bring you up here on my screen as well. Here we are. Great. So yes, Finbar, I know that you're originally an engineer, I was reading, and a business leader in Sligo. And you were the former chair and are still on the board of the Sligo Business Improvement District. You're the chair of Sligo Tidy Towns, a member of the government advisory group for the Town Centre First framework, as JP referred to. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Morning, Minister. Morning, everyone.
Great, thanks, Finbar. And finally, I am really pleased to welcome Julia Veloni. So Julia, she's a senior architect in the Capital Projects Implementation Unit of Cork County Council. And I know that you work closely with local communities, with the elected members and officials, and deliver these urban design master plans that really, and I can sense this is a great passion of yours, create people-friendly towns and villages. And I hope we hear a lot more about that this morning. So welcome, Julia.
Thanks, Ali.
Great. So let's say a way to sort of open up our conversation today, and we'll maybe just go in the same order as we joined the panel just now. So starting with you, Michael. So just to ask each of you, what in your view are the key elements of a vibrant rural community? So over to you, Michael, first.
Thank you, Ellie. Yeah, I suppose in Tipperary Town, I suppose Tipperary, I don't know how familiar your participants are with it. It's probably a microcosm for a lot of the issues that prevail in rural Ireland. So, you know, high levels of vacancy. We have 20 or 30% commercial vacancy on the main street. You know, a lot of social inclusion issues. With a national route, the N24, Limerick to Waterford, runs through the heart of the town. So we're developing a plan at the moment to address these issues. So I suppose some of our aims, we structured it under 4 pillars: the public realm, economic development and opportunity, the natural environment and sustainability, and social inclusion. So we're trying to develop infrastructure around, you know, transport, making transport timetabling work better, broadband, design civic spaces, you know, to drive footfall and dwell time, and then working with local clubs, societies and stakeholder organisations like the Chamber of Commerce to increase community participation, and also to link better with our surrounding environment. You see the background behind me there at the Glen of Aherlow. It's a wonderful river valley nestled between the Galties and Slieve na Muck. It's only a couple of kilometres from Tipperary Town, but there's no physical link. You know, people don't associate the two, so we're trying to develop a linear trail from one to the other. That brings challenges in terms of, you know, landowners, private and public, between the two. So we're trying to overcome issues like that. And we have a public park, a 23-acre public park adjacent to the town called the Hills. So we're trying to enhance that and, you know, really try and link the surrounding environment with the community. And then the range of, I suppose, a good range of shops and businesses, and I suppose care of our environment and built heritage would be sign of a vibrant community. So a good range of schools and the services, access to healthcare that people want and expect.
Wow, Michael, it's just showing me how much creates a vibrant community, how much is needed. When you were speaking, I was getting the sense of, like when you described your pillars, all the structural elements, but then also reaching out to this powerful nature you have around you and actually weaving that in with the life of the town itself. And then actually retaining the beautiful old buildings or good schools, good centres, sort of dotted around the whole space. Thank you. That's a really wonderful sort of painting the picture for us of everything that's needed to create a vibrant town. How about for you, Finbar? What would you say are the key elements that make up a vibrant rural community?
Well, just before I answer that question, Ali, I just might take a quick second to let people know what a bid is, because many people may not know what it is.
What do you mean what a bid is?
It's Sligo bid, the Business Improvement District.
Oh, okay. Yeah, tell us.
The Business Improvement District in Sligo came about when the business community, by a vote in a geographically defined area, decided that they would charge an extra levy on themselves to carry out projects that the business community would like to see happen that currently weren't happening. And you have to be voted through every 5 years. So we're in our second 5-year term, and we had an 80% yes vote the second time around. And I'll come back to why it's important. We have a bit later. But to answer your question, what are the key elements to a vibrant rural community? It needs to be connected. If it's not connected, it's not going to know what it wants. And it needs to have a sense of place and identity. And going back to JP's term about the interdependency or interconnectivity of towns, villages, and cities, every place needs to have an understanding of where it fits in that hierarchy and what it needs to do to support both itself, but smaller villages than it or larger cities than it. So it needs to know what its journey is and where it's going to. And we found in Sligo that until we became connected, and we did become, the business community became connected through the bid, and it also helped us to connect better with our local authority. The business community now in Sligo have a fantastic relationship with the local authority. And I see Margaret McConnell is on the call today. She's one of the people that we interact on a weekly basis with on various projects in the town. And we're all going in the one direction because we know our vision. And our vision is to make Sligo the best possible version of itself and to grow to a town of 40,000 in line with the Ireland 2040 plan. But until you have that vision and until you know where you're going to, you're going nowhere. And for years, Sligo was going nowhere because we didn't have the vision. If you go back to the late 60s, Sligo had a population of approximately 20,000. Galway had a population of 35. Galway now is a population of 80. Sligo is a population of 20,000 because we didn't have the vision. We didn't know where we were going. We weren't connected. We were pulling apart. And many towns and villages, you have disparate groups going in different directions, and they're wasting so much fantastic energy. Whereas if they all got on the one direction, and we liken it to a train journey, that you all have to get on the train because the train is going to one place. And you may not like the whole journey and you may get off halfway, but as long as you're on the train and you're going in the right direction, then your town is going in the right direction. And Minister Humphreys mentioned going for a cup of coffee. Well, that's what is happening in our towns. 20 years ago, people came to town to shop and maybe buy a cup of coffee. Now they're coming to town to buy a cup of coffee and maybe shop. So it is about having that experience that Minister Humphreys talked about, having your town a place where people want to come to and want to live in. And until you get to there, we're going nowhere.
Thank you, Finbar. I'm kind of holding those two, at least the two primary elements you brought out, which was first of all, the utter importance of connectedness, and then the fact that you have to have a vision. And I was kind of, so it sounds to me like there is, that the vision actually, if there's an inspiring enough vision, it can help to get all those different parts of a town, all the different entities connected together to head in the same direction.
But it has to be realistic.
Yeah. So maybe we can hear a little bit more about that. But it's kind of there's a sort of iterative dance between the two of those. And then your final part about a place where you want to go for a coffee. You know, I was thinking, I just was watching Julia's film about her work in Clonakilty, and I was thinking, oh yes, that sounds exactly what we all want. So thanks, Finbar. And maybe now moving on to you, Julia. What would you say are the elements of a vibrant rural community for you?
Yeah, Ali, just picking up on what you just said about the video of Clonakilty and Finbar's energy word, I just would like to answer your question by saying saying, what are the key evidence of a vibrant rural community? And as Young Girl says, a good town is like a good party. People stay longer than really necessary because they're enjoying themselves. So I imagine that towns should be looking like a big party all the time, where people are in the streets. And as Finbar touched on, it's elements like sense of place, street spirit of community, sense of belonging, and sense of stewardship. It's something that we mentioned this morning as well with the other speakers. There is a key evidence from the 19th century photograph that those towns were active and they were socially, there were people in the street, there were marketing, there were economical activity, and everybody looked happy. But what it is now and what happened, however, this spirit of community has been fractured because the design response after the car advent was actually just to address the car driver experience rather than the citizen or the community. So unfortunately, we have transformed all this beautiful town center and vibrant community in places for parking and car parking and traffic. So it's really about trying to respond by a new built environment quality standards that put people first. And this town center first policy is very promising because it is about the people that are actually driving even the brief development of a town. When I work with the town in County Council, we don't do the brief on a desktop. We actually go down there and talk to people, and I think it's that cultural asset of heritage that we need to bring back. And we need to be fast because these people are still there, elderly people that remember how the towns were, remember the Corpus Christi, they remember the kiss and the dance at the crossroad. It's these things we need to bring back and just give back to the community.
Wow, thank you, Julia. Yeah, I do think we need to be fast. You know, I was thinking not only because our elders in our communities are getting older and older, but also just, I guess, that cultural web that we had created, it can be fragile. It can be so quickly broken down. And yeah, I really hope that for all of our efforts, we can bring that back. So I wonder maybe, and just to say, Donal, I'm going to keep working with the panel for now, and then we'll have some responses and discussion with the wider group after that. So yeah, in some ways, I'm thinking we're in a very interesting time now, because you could say that what's happened over, or we can definitely say that's what's happened over the last year and a half has further kind of maybe broken down that any web of community that we had in our rural towns and so on, with all of our, you know, what came into place with a global pandemic. But I wonder if there's also another way of looking at it, which is, what opportunities is that bringing? You know, so we've had the COVID pandemic, we have, you know, maybe related, but increasingly urgent degradation of our natural environment and climate change very much upon us. We're moving to, as we talked about, having digital hubs and so on, a very digital based way of working, which can be, JP had mentioned, if you're in a home with other people there, you know, that can be challenging. Equally, being completely isolated working digitally also has real difficult consequences. But how about the opportunities? So just to kind of set that scene, COVID, climate change, digital transition, what opportunity does that bring to our rural towns? And maybe back to you, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Ali. So look, remote working and that digital economy is the most obvious opportunity, and it's great to see the government resourcing it both through policy and resources. Here in Tipperary, we're just about to start work on our digital hub, an innovation centre, so that will renovate 4,000 square feet of space in a previously technology enterprise centre in the town. And we're just going through the process of hiring a project manager. And I think there's great opportunities there. There seems to be very good buy-in from both the public and private sectors. And I think there's an opportunity to attract second sight companies to base themselves. We had a jobs announcement here in Tiptown recently, a cybersecurity company headed by a local man. They're based in Dublin at the moment, but they're going to base 25 of their staff here in Tipperary town. So it's those kind of opportunities are there to be capitalized on. If we can, you know, if we can market ourselves and sell that rural way of life, that more simple way of life. Just in terms of the green economy, there's going to be opportunities in retrofitting homes, obviously, and we're looking at training initiatives to upskill people that may have worked in the construction sector previously, with local Tipperary Education and Training Board here. Then biofuel and anaerobic digestion, those types of industries have potential in rural Ireland. That circular economy, upcycling and recycling, and also traditional building skills. We've got an awful lot of vacant stock, as we know, in our town centres that need to be restored, carefully restored. So there's opportunities there for the development of traditional skills. And then tourism as well, of course, we have moved towards this outdoor lifestyle because of COVID. So there's opportunities to develop staycation packages and so on for rural locations. So there's lots of opportunities. I think the future is bright for rural Ireland, and COVID has really accelerated that digital transition.
Yeah, and I'm really getting from what you're saying, Michael, is this, as it means we can accelerate creating these digital hubs, but then it's bringing people back into our towns. They can then be based in the centre of the town, working there, rather than having to travel to the big city. And this further construction, basically, within the green economy, I didn't know about that. That's really exciting to hear. So thank you. So moving on to you, Finbar, what about for you, these times we've been living through, what opportunities does it bring from your perspective to rural towns?
COVID has been very good for rural towns. When people were told to work from home in Dublin and Galway and Limerick, the vast majority of them ended up going to Sligo and Ballina and Tubbercurry and Clonmel and the smaller towns, and they went home. When people in Sligo were told to work from home, they just went to the housing estate down the road. So they didn't, the vast majority of them. So the rural towns did quite well during COVID, and that's seen all over Europe. It's the same, all major cities are suffering. We need to be careful though about pushing too much for people to continue to work from home or to remote work, because we need them coming into our towns. Sligo town is predominantly reopened post-COVID. My footfall is still down 22% compared to 2019. So I'm doing well. But if you look at in Dublin, footfall is still down 70 and 80% in businesses similar to mine. So there is a balancing act, because if we neglect our cities, well, then they're the real economic engines of the country. So there is a balancing act. What we have been lucky in rural Ireland that people have come back, but we do need to get them out and about, and we do need to get them working in the towns as opposed to working in the rough, like JP this morning in his daughter's bedroom. We need JP to be working someplace in the middle of town, that he gets out and he interacts in the town, because your town is only vibrant if there's people moving around it. And the one thing the lockdown has shown is that when you take the people out of your town, you lose your beating heart. And when you don't have a beating heart, everything stops. So we need to be very careful there that we don't focus too much on getting people to work from home at the detriment of the businesses that are in our town centres. And it is a vicious circle, because if the town isn't good, then people won't want to come back to work in it. So there's a very fine balancing act there we have to work on.
Yeah, very good point, Finbar. Thank you. And I'd actually like to go into that a little bit further. We'll just continue with this round for now, just looking more broadly at opportunities, and then maybe come back to that. Thank you. So Julia, what about for you, particularly these unprecedented times? What opportunity do you see that bringing to towns?
Yeah, I would like to answer to say we should, as a society, go back to the future. Those 19th century photographs are showing it all, and it was quite healthy and sustainable to live all together. And unfortunately, during the years, we have perhaps contributed to destroy the beautiful object of towns is as an object in the landscape, but we have with unsustainable planning destroyed this sense of being together. So it's about, I would say, the compact growth and the density that again was introduced by the Project Ireland 2040, and with COVID has been obviously accelerated. So I'd like you all probably still remember very clear those images in Italy during COVID of people singing from the balconies, and their neighbors was very much a life hope. And this is what we need to change the paradigm in terms of creating density context and not isolation, because this was a very big problem before COVID. And that's why re-inhabiting the place and 15 million neighborhood, living about the shop, raise a family in Main Street, shop locally, meet your neighbors, it's all coming up now together in an accelerated way. And in terms of the agenda, obviously, of the climate transition, this is absolutely spot on, because once you reduce the mobility in terms of driving outside and stay inside and reuse the buildings, that's the best kind of matching, is two sides of the same medal.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. Really painting that picture there, Julia. Thanks so much. So yeah, I'd actually like to, I'll introduce another one just to go into that a little bit deeper. And yeah, I can come to you, Finbar. I guess this maybe builds on what you've each been saying, and you were pointing to, Finbar. It's just, if we, you know, in a sense, it's not just that we want to attract people to be back into the rural area, into the counties, but actually to come and live right in the town. That's what I'm hearing when you said about, you know, being above the shop, Julia, and so on. So how do we do that? How do we practically do that? And I know you were saying, again, it's a bit of a sort of chicken and egg sort of thing. So maybe, yeah, I know, Finbar, you were ready to say something. So over to you first. How can we do this?
Well, just on those 19th century photos where everybody was building around our town centres, they were doing that because they had no opportunity to go anywhere else, because they had no transport, and they had to come to town because they had to shop every day because they didn't have fridges. So both fridges and transport have changed how our businesses and our towns will work forever. I hear a lot said about living over the shop, and I'm one of those people. I'm sitting currently, my office is what my parents' bedroom was 40 years ago. So I grew up over the shop with many other businesses. I don't think there's that opportunity that is thrown out there about living over the shop, because on my street, there's 40 businesses and only 4 of them have a possibility of somebody living over the shop. And they're buildings that are completely vacant already, because the vast majority of buildings that are used on the ground floor in our rural areas are being used upstairs as well. Going back to the fact that there was only one entrance into the building when the family who owned it lived there. So in my case, if somebody wanted to move into my building, I would have to give up 6 foot of my shop front, which is only 20 feet. And that's not going to happen. So until we start thinking about our rural towns and going on a helicopter view and looking down at them and look at all the space behind in our blocks, which were the vegetable patches for the people who lived in the buildings in the 1900s that are now abandoned, that's where I think we really need to focus. And then those buildings where you have potential to go upstairs, you enter them from the back on the 2nd and 3rd story, where you're not infringing on the businesses on the ground floor.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So
now, what was the other question? Sorry, Ali.
Well, it's all related, Finbar, but it's kind of like, how do we, I mean, I think for me, the home above the shop it's the image, it's the inspiration. It's more just, how do we have more people living in our rural towns, not just in the kind of wider county? Well, and I think you just described one model, but yeah, any other ideas? JP
put up a picture there of Boyle, where they're now reinvigorating or regenerating the Royal Hotel. We have a hotel around the corner from us. It became a hotel, then it became a nightclub, and now it's abandoned. And we have those in every town in the country. The old hotel that became the nightclub that's now dead. We could put 40 apartments on that site, but the people who owned the hotel don't have the funding to do it. So until we start getting serious about putting funding into specific targeted projects that have a return, where you know you'll get people living in them, we're going nowhere. And that's what I would like to see happen, is that we pick targeted ones. And if you can get 40 families living in that street, it's a huge benefit. It really brings back the vibrancy that Julia is talking about. But the business community don't have the money to do that, because so many of us got burnt in the last crash. And on top of that, those who have the money don't have the appetite to do it because of the risks involved. So until we have joined up thinking and we have a scheme where there is a regeneration fund, and I'm delighted to see that something may be coming through the Town Centres First policy, that's where I think how we can go forward.
Thank you, Finbar. So it's funding, but it's also from that connected. I hear that joined up. It's this. It needs to be connected between you as the business leaders and the funding sources from the government itself. How about you, Michael? This challenge of, you know, it's not just about coming back to the county itself, but really living in the town. How could we help make that happen?
Yeah, that's something we've been looking at. It's a huge challenge for us here in Tipperary, actually, because we've over 10,000 vehicles going through the main thoroughfare every day. A lot of them are HGVs, so it's not an attractive space at the moment. There's consultation going on the N24 Limerick to Waterford, but it's going to take a decade or more for that project to be realised. But I agree entirely with what Finbar said there about the space behind these buildings. We've 85 vacant properties in our town centre. Access is a big problem in a lot of them, and you're coming out the front door to that traffic. So that space behind, I think, is important. We're starting to see some development in that area with recent planning permission approval for an old heritage building, an old educational centre for 6 apartments. So I think there's an appetite for it, but the return on investment is a big problem. I've engaged with some of these vacant property owners. We're part of the collaborative town centre health check that the Heritage Council programme, Ali Harvey, and we've put together a vacancy database, and we started contacting the owners, and I stood in some of the buildings with them. I had one in particular, an owner, she wanted to open a small business there, but just the return on the investment just wasn't there. You couldn't recommend it. She would go ahead with it, and she wouldn't have got the finance. So that comes back to what Finbar was saying, and I think he hit the nail on the head there. So, but yeah, and possibly just picking up on some Julia's points, designing the town centres for people rather than traffic is hugely important. Look, we're a bit away from that at the moment, but that's ultimately where we need to get to.
Wow, thank you, Michael, and thanks. It sounds like there's a real resonance there, your experience in Tipperary town with exactly what Finbar was sharing for himself and Sligo. So maybe back to you, Julia, just because I think you really illuminated this vision, but just kind of how do we do it? Is there ideas from you of how we attract people in to actually live in the town centre?
I'll tell you a little story. Personal. When I came to Ireland first, I was very surprised to see how many farmer bachelors there were in Ireland, and why they didn't have a wife. And I just want to say my grandfather was a farmer. He was an olive oil producer and wine producer, but he always came back to the town centre when he finished the day with his Vespa. He was driving back, and every Sunday and every Saturday, everybody, elderly people, is out in the town centre. They have these cultural clubs, and the retiring centres are in the town centre after all. So it is quite a challenge how to convince these people that live outside the town centre how to eliminate the dream of the landscape living outside the town centre and bring them back. I like to say that we need some sort of FOMO strategy for drivers, where FOMO, I mean fear of missing out. So we have to create a context in the town centre with the public space and with infrastructure where a driver feels really I have to take this car off and walk and enjoy the party. So it's again about get rid of all this design for road and for driver experience. So it's about reclaiming the streets, which is what I often use as a word, because the streets were there. And we have terrific policy, national and European policy for this, because we have mentioned, of course, the centre, town centre health check. We have the DEMERS, which is a very good template for battling those road design standards. We have to go back to Finbar's worry about the buildings, how we reuse. The RAI has published a beautiful publication, Old House, New Home, Understanding, Reimagine, Conserve. We have a lot to learn how to go around challenges of fire regulation, building regulation, but we have a lot of policy there and expertise to go to. We just need to be ambitious, because I found sometimes coming from another country that I really think that the phrase of it's better than before, it doesn't really apply. We really have to be very ambitious for those town centers, and starting with materials. I see, unfortunately, a lot of times fear of using stone in town center and use concrete. This is not acceptable, because if you go to the rest of Europe, every town center is proud, is standing alone with great materials, and that's what we need to start with, from the small things, to stop doing wrong things.
Wow, thank you, Julia. And you just reminded me, this aspect of the people first strategy is also not car first, in a sense. Cars are very useful for us, they're functional, but being so car dominant is actually, it's not a community environment, our town places. And I think it's something I read of your work. I was thinking, my town, local town, is RD, and there's this space that really, to me, feels like the market square, and no doubt it was. I'm a newcomer here, but it's a super value car park, and it's kind of like, but it has that feeling. I can feel it used to be a square, it is the square. And why can that not be our squares again, even without having to go back to the 19th century days of not having any car or any fridge at all? So Julia, maybe just to the next question, I wanted to kind of lead with you, because this is just kind of going into, we've looked at things like the funding that's going to come, the support perhaps at the governmental level. How about also in local authorities? So I know with your role as an architect within the county council, how would you say that the local authority can really be a leader in bringing life back into towns and villages? What's your experience of that?
Yeah, I definitely.
Oh, you're just on mute. Yeah.
Yeah, Ali, the local authority play a very good role in this context. We are the people on site, on the field, but we still need to have a vision, as we said. In my personal experience, we talk about urban design master plan rather than engineering solution-led plans. So we used to say, and we still do traffic studies. We need to change the paradigm. We're going to talk about transport rather than traffic. We're going to talk about urban design first, and then we retrofit, car or roads. If you this can be applied to housing development or town center development. You have to make a multifunctional infrastructure in the town center, not a monocolor like retail. So in terms of the local authority, my experience is about joining resources and department, working with multidisciplinary department. In my new team called Capital Project, we are engineers, ecologists, architects, and we are working together for the same goal, which is community. For instance, I also work with the cost of flooding department, which is all the OPW flood relief schemes, and we do take the money. I like to say, at every excavation, at every pothole, there is always an opportunity to spend money for amenity. So we did that with roads project like Kila in East Cork. It was a TII money, but we designed it together with the outcome of people. We did with the OPW in many towns. So we just unveiled Clonakilty only a few weeks ago. We're doing Middleton, and we put people first. My other point, very important, apart from, again, not missing an opportunity to use public spending for every engineer, public spending for building and community. The last point is public engagement and start from people first. So the local authority have always had this big challenge in everywhere in the world, not only in Ireland, that there is lack of trust from citizens. We need to break that wall and go there as we do to engage at design stage, early design stage, not at the end when we have already option A, B, and C. We need to go to people before formulating option A, B, and C. And I like to, I'm proud to say that my last project with my team, which is Cove Public Realm, got the highest record of public engagement. We got 722 submissions for the Part 8 of the town center, and somebody would have said, oh, you're so unlucky, but actually it was a great result, because the majority of those is actually supportive, and that's what you get when you actually, as a local authority, you go down and you work together.
Wow, Julia, thank you. And I saw Finbar nodding there as well with this. I was realizing JP started with talking about interconnectedness, then we had connection joined up, and then you're saying that really that's the key role that the local authority could play, is really being joined up within itself and also with the citizens themselves. And to have the courage to actually not have a pre-prepared plan options A, B, and C, but really leave it open and truly consult is really inspiring to hear, and to hear how successfully that worked in Cove and no doubt in other places. So I think what I'm going to do is actually, it'll be more like a specific question for each person. So I really wanted to hear Julia's views on that. And now maybe coming to you, Finbar, more at the level of what do you see should be the focus of supports for businesses in rural towns and villages? So if you'd be willing to respond to that.
Yeah, firstly, I agree with everything Julia said. I was going to say, come out of your silos and talk to us. That makes a huge difference. And us mean the business community and the people. The support for businesses in towns is quite simple. We need to get more people living in our towns, because for the businesses to survive, we can only survive on the population that's in our town. So there is a bit of a myth out there that we're going to fill all these vacant shops with other businesses. That's not going to happen, because we're not charities, we're businesses. So someone isn't going to open a business just to fill a hole in the street. So we need to just think about that first of all and get more people living in our town centres. We can do simple things to entice the business community to get more involved by having shopfront grants. Give someone 500 quid to help them paint their building. It builds trust, it builds relationships, and it is about trust and relationships is what is going to move us forward, because we're all in this together. It's not just the councils, it's not just the business community, it's not just the residents of our towns, it's everyone. So it's simple things to help the business community, like a grant, like building illuminations, like urban realm upgrades, and we're doing a lot of them. But remember, if we do urban realm upgrades in every town and village, well, then none of them are going to be special, because we're all going to be the same. So if we're very, very targeted, and that's why I keep coming back to, we need to have targeted programs in targeted towns to make them grow so they can be the anchor for all our sub-towns underneath them in their area.
Yeah, thank you, Finbar. And this comes to that second key point that JP was making, which is every town is unique. So it has to be targeted. Every experience is going to be different. And I love your pragmatic suggestion there of it's a grant, but it's for something specific, like shopfront upgrade, something specific. You can go and access it and do that.
Well,
and
if a council person comes to a business person with 500 quid to do up their building, and then the next time they're coming back saying, we're closing your street for a month because we're doing it up, you'll have a much easier discussion with that business person than you would have beforehand. And it is a way of building the trust. Yes, and we have to build the trust. And Julia hit a nail on the head. It's perfect what she's doing. Yeah. And it's what we're doing in Sligo. And it's really working.
Yeah, thanks so much, Finbar. Okay, so moving on to a final question from Michael, and then I'll maybe just ask one thing to you all to wrap it up. So Michael, maybe something directed more specifically at you around the Town Centre First framework. So I know that there's this kind of focus on enabling communities, businesses to plan the future for their towns. So how can this best be supported? You know, how's that really going to work? What makes that work well?
I think JP mentioned in his presentation, you know, local communities and local authorities working together to plan from the bottom up. We've just come through that process here in Tipperary, where we have great buy-in from the local authority right throughout the process. We concentrated a lot at the early stages on data analysis and, you know, gathering baseline data to build that evidence base. And then I suppose when we were building specific pieces of our plan, for example, the tourism strategy, we had assistance from the tourism officer and the heritage officer and the local authority. The director of services for economic development has been very involved in the process. We've done an awful lot of consultation. We had a public survey with nearly 600 respondents to it. We had very targeted focus groups then in specific areas like retail, tourism and social inclusion and so on, where we had local stakeholders and subject matter experts brought in from not necessarily from the area, who all sat around the table and tried to work through solutions for specific issues that the town was experiencing. So that capacity building, I think, is very important as well. It's great to see that there's going to be town centre officers appointed to work with, to, I suppose, build that link between the business community and citizens and the local authority, because I think the trust is a big is a big issue. Certainly we had that in Tipperary town. I think there was a very fractious relationship between the local authority and the people on the ground and the businesses. We're starting to see maybe green shoots of positivity now. Finbar mentioned the painting scheme. We've 60 buildings in the town centre painted will have by the end of the year through that local authority scheme, the streetscape scheme, and it's made a huge difference visually. The impact on the town, it's been great. So we're working very hard on building that relationship between the local authority and other agencies as well. On our task force, we have the Education and Training Board, Enterprise Ireland, and so on. And just one example of that collaboration is we have an old civic building at Danbury House in the middle of town. And one of our priority projects is that the Education and Training Board and Youth Services are going to take that over and turn it into a further education and youth centre. So it's initiatives like that, I suppose, with everyone working together, that they really do build community capital over. But it takes time and a lot of effort on everyone's part.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I think it's really, having heard you said it now as well, this trust theme, I think it's been spoken by all three of you. And it's so essential, of course. It's the basis of relationship and connection, which is where a truly connected community of citizens can thrive and enjoy their lives together. And it sounds like practically even just having that role of this coordination role between the local authority and the town development, that sounds like there can be practical things like that can really help. So we're going to bring this conversation, start to bring it to a close, but maybe inviting a final statement from each of you, maybe just starting to kind of take what you've each been sharing from your experiences in the towns that you're either in or worked in and so on, but also looking slightly more broadly. And we have this theme of, every town is unique. And here we are, we already found from the beginning of our forum that we are gathered here from many different parts of rural Ireland. So how can we actually, other than keeping on having fora like this, which could be great too, but, how can we share experiences and really kind of better understand, share learnings between different types of towns, between all of the different towns that we have experiences of, to make things for the best in Ireland as a whole. So maybe starting again with you, Michael, and then we'll go back around and this will be our last comments. So yeah, any final thoughts on that, Michael? How can we share our experiences with each other?
Yeah, I think maybe the idea of town centre forums or networks within counties led by the town centre officers, just in terms of the differences between towns. I mentioned earlier, we concentrated very much on gathering data, talking to people on the ground. There was very intensive stakeholder consultation. It might be hard to replicate that. I suppose I'm in a paid full-time role, and there was a manager before me who facilitated a lot of that work. But it can be done through forums, and just, I suppose, that knowledge transfer between towns, if we can facilitate that some way. I suppose digitally, maybe it's now easier to do than it was before, where you have to get everyone into one room around a table. There's learnings, I suppose, from town to town in terms of actions that have been successful, funding they've been able to access, and so on. So I think networks and forums may be a way to do that.
Yeah, I love the sound of that. It's like, yeah, so if you have a leader in each town, but then there's a kind of a wider network across town, across county, maybe across country, where we could share periodically. How about for you, Finbar? How does this kind of, you really brought in this theme of connection. What about going wider beyond the town or the county itself? How can we share learning? Yeah,
well, at the start of COVID, the 5 bid companies in Ireland and 14 other towns, we joined up to form the Irish Town and City Development Association. And basically, it's a forum where we can talk to each other about ideas, whereas towns are unique and towns are different. You can pocket it, or you can bucket towns together in sizes, where they may not have all the same issues, but they will have similar issues. So we would learn from issues in Cork, and the outdoor dining schemes in Cork were fantastic, and they were way ahead of everybody else in the country, and we learned from that. So it is about having a forum. I have lobbied as part of my advisory role with the Town Centres First policy that we need to have something akin to the Scottish Towns Partnerships, where all the bid organisations in Scotland work together. There's pros and cons to how that one works, because it's too directed by government, and it's actually seen by practitioners on the ground just to be another arm of government. If we want to be real, it needs to be more independent, so that we have a voice for the towns and that people can say what has to be said, instead of saying what is acceptable to say. And until we're honest in these forums and say what has to be said, we're spinning wheels. So it is about having a place for us to talk openly, where everyone is equal, be it The smallest little village, like the smallest partaker in what we're doing is the village of Cong, and it's in the same group as Dublin town. They have different issues, but it's amazing how many things are quite similar for both of them. So
wow.
We do have to talk.
Yeah, thank you, Finbar. And I think taking from that what you were saying, that maybe even these spaces to speak should be independent, could be independent of the local authority or of a government initiative. And then it's having the trust to speak honestly and genuinely in that, and having the trust at the level of the government leadership to sort of allow, you know, to have something, to have a free space where people can speak is ultimately going to lead to true connection and relationship. How about for you, Julia, then, just a final sort of statement on how we could learn from our different experiences, different towns, and share that between each other?
Yeah, I would like to follow with the 2 points. In this is not only the trust, I think, is also the expertise, because we have a range of towns and villages. We have market towns, walled towns, villages, small settlement. They all have something in common, which is the potential for community and sense of pride. They're all different in terms of architecture and heritage, and I think we are into danger of losing that. So we need expertise to actually protect the cultural heritage we have, tangible and intangible. And this is what makes every town different. In terms of what we can look at, where the common points are, is the living, the quality of living together. And it's it doesn't matter where you live, if you are in geographically or culturally or climately, we people act the same way. We are social animals. And I wanted to just relate to this conference in October, and this first European shared architecture and built environment for everyone policy, and a report that was published in October, where 33 case studies were selected over Europe as to put together the assessment for quality of place. And Clonakilty was one of the 33 case studies selected, which we're very proud of. And it is, again, an assessment about how can we improve. It's about equality, equity, sustainability, and beauty. And this is the new Bauhaus that comes from the European Commission. So I really think that to add on, yes, network communication, nobody has to invent the wheel. There is case study already working there, and it's just to put them together in a network.
Great. So we've got the network that Michael brought in. We've got the fact of really having two spaces to connect and talk, and perhaps independent ones where we speak honestly. And then the fact we have the case studies there. So these case studies can be disseminated through these networks. And congratulations on the Clonakilty one. I'm not surprised that's part of it. So I'd really like to just thank all three of our fantastic panel leaders for this public conversation that we've all been joining in. And so maybe I'll just thank each of you individually and invite you down from being up on screen, and then just introduce what we're about to go into next. So just with that, thank you so much to all of you.